is approved.
An act postponing the December 2022 Barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections, amending for the purpose RA 9164 as amended by RA 9340, 10632, 10656, 10923, 10952, and 11462, and for other purposes.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 1306 under Committee Report number 4 and recognize our chairperson, Senator Imee Marcos of the Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation to sponsor the measure.
Is there any objection to the motion of the Majority Leader? There being none, the motion is approved.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Majority Leader, my esteemed colleagues of the Philippine Senate, good afternoon. Today I submit to this chamber Committee Report number 4, sponsoring herewith Senate Bill 1306, an act entitled Postponing the December 2022 Barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections, amending for the purpose RA 9164 as amended by RA 9340, RA 10632, RA 10656, RA 10923, RA 10952, and Republic Act 11462, and for other purposes. 3 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, I sponsored the first act passed by the 18th Congress, postponing the Barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections from the second Monday of May 2022 to December 5, 2020. I then made a promise in full plenary on public record that it would be the last of the repeated postponements of the barangay elections. Today, in the immortal words of the late great Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago, let me confess, just as she did, I lied. I lied. Levity aside, there are compelling reasons why I must renege on that promise. The fact that the Barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections have been postponed relentlessly through decades merely underlies the unfinished business of deeper issues plaguing both the Barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan systems. Unang-una, halos taon-taon na tayong nag-e-eleksyon. At kung tutuusin, napakaikli ng 3 taon para gampanan ang napakabigat na trabaho sa barangay. Responde sa tuwing may bagyo, maghahabol ng magnanakaw, mamamagitan sa kapitbahay kapag tumawid ng baboy sa bakuran, pati sa away ng mga asawang nagseselos, lagot sikap. Nung tinamaan tayo ng COVID, sila ang sadyang naging frontliners mula sa ospital hanggang sa bahay-bahay, maging sa bukid at lansangan. Love ko sikap, ang sabi ni Senator Bong Revilla. Sabay rin si Senator Lapid, Cayetano, Ejercito, Escudero, Estrada, Tolentino, na tulad ko na nilbihan sa lokal. A quick review reveals that every barangay election since 1989 has been postponed, resulting in an actual extension of term averaging 4 to 5 years. Hence, I propose that the term of barangay and SK officials be finally extended to 6 years and permanently fix their elections every May, the year following presidential elections. In fact, I have filed Senate Bill number 1195 last August 16, 2022, positing just such an extension and fixing the dates for both the barangay and SK elections for good. Man din di ko tanggap bilang dakilang Ilocana ang gastos na nilalaan sa kada eleksyon. Manual lang nga at hindi automated, pumapatak pa din ng bilyon-bilyon. Sa hirap ng panahon ngayon, hindi ba dapat tayong puspusan magtipid? Magagalit higit sa lahat si Senator Angara sa atin na panay ang hanap ng pera. There is likewise a need to revise and streamline the present Sangguniang Kabataan system. In particular, the feasibility of abolishing the Federasyon ng Sangguniang Kabataan at the barangay level, only maintaining it at the city and municipal levels. Ironically, the good intention of our first anti-dynasty legal provision contained in the SK Charter, disqualifying relatives up to the second degree of consanguinity of affinity to any incumbent official, has rendered ineligible a large class of voters, particularly in the small barangays of 200, 300, 400 voters, where almost everyone is blood-related or by marriage. In my view, instead of an SK federation, a single SK representative in every barangay or municipal council should be considered. Perhaps a federation, a full federation, is warranted only at the city or provincial level, with the additional proviso only of reorganizing the SK Federation every 3 years or at midterm, thus avoiding the need for yet another election. Bilang orig na kabataang barangay, lola na po ng mga SK, pakiwarin kong gaganda ang takbo ng SK kapag naisaayos ang kanilang termino kasabay ng mga barangay kapitan. Thus, this proposed election postponement is a means to buy us time for a series of measures that the Committee on Electoral Reform and People's Participation is proposing to Congress. This is merely a preliminary measure to give us time to study and debate the deeper issues confronting the barangay and SK systems under our present law. A word of caution, too, regarding the budget COMELEC has requested for the postponement. Out of the 8.441 billion pesos allotted for December 2022 barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections, there should be a balance by month's end of roughly 7.583 billion. COMELEC claims, however, that they have somehow obligated or disbursed far more. And then they are requesting that should the elections be postponed to December 2023, the amount of 18.441 billion should be provided in the 2023 budget. That is over 218% more than their budget this year, an amount I think is unmerited. Sa tingin ko, kung kailangan magdagdag ng additional na 15% na additional precincts, 15% karagdagang botante, 15% na teachers at BEI, 15% sa mga supplies, dapat 15% lang ang idadagdag sa dating budget ng 8.4 o mahigit kumulang 9.6 billion. Kung nagtapat ang dakilang senador Miriam Defensor Santiago na siyang nagsisinungaling, may sinabi rin siya, kahit sinong tanga pwedeng tumakbo sa posisyon at posibleng umani ng boto sa kapwa niyan tanga. Wala naman sigurong tanga dito, kundi lahat matitinik at masisipag na senador nakatuon sa trabahong hinaharap. September at bare months na po, ramdam na ang Pasko. Paspasan na natin ang pagpapaubaya ng halalang barangay at SK ngayon. Maraming salamat, Ginoong Pangulo at mga minamahal kong kasamahan sa Senado.
Maraming salamat, Madam Imee Marcos, our chairperson. Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President, thank you. Next to co-sponsor the measure is the distinguished gentleman from the great province of Cavite, no other than Senator Ramon Bong Revilla. I move that he be recognized, Mr. President.
Our distinguished colleague from Cavite, Senator Ramon Bong Revilla Jr. is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to give my full support to this measure. The postponement of barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections is a hot topic that needed to be discussed. And matters related thereto had to be divided urgently before we incur more costs that could otherwise be spent in other government programs that would benefit our people. Narinig na natin ang mga punto na magkabilang panig. And in the interest of the greater good, another postponement cannot be evaded. Nagpapasalamat tayo kay Senator Imee Marcos sa mabilisang aksyon dahil alam nating mismong COMELEC na ang nagsabi na hanggat walang batas na naipapasa ang Kongreso ay patuloy silang maghahanda para sa darating na eleksyon. Ang ina-avoid po din natin dito, Ginoong Pangulo, ay ang magkabangga pa ang mga magkakabarangay, magkakaibigan, magkakapitbahay. Wala naman palang eleksyon. Yun po ang ating dapat ma-avoid. At kailangan ang pinal na desisyon para mahupa ang namumuong pagtutunggali sa ibaba. Hindi na dapat palalong lumala ang sitwasyon sa ating mga barangay. We have to diffuse this brewing tension, and it can be achieved only after we settle this once and for all. Sa panukalang ito, tinimbang natin ang sitwasyon ng bansa sa kasalukuyan. Ang hirap ng buhay at hindi pa rin natatapos na pandemya sa isang banda. At ang epekto ng postponement sa buhay at kapakanan ng taong bayan. To strike the balance, Mr. President, in pushing for this postponement, we also have to ensure that it will be utilized so that more Filipinos are able to exercise their right of suffrage come elections time. After all, their choice always decides the fate of our nation. If the able sponsor, Senator Imee, would allow, may this representation be co-sponsor, Madam Imee. Thank you, Mr. President.
Maraming salamat po, Ginoong Senador Revilla. May proceed.
Yes, Mr. President, and before we proceed, I am moving that we adjourn the session at the back, Mr. President, because we can actually hear them here, Mr. President.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Should I call the Sergeant at Arms? Not necessary. It's not necessary, General. We'll appeal to our colleagues in the back if we can.
We appeal, Mr. President.
They can bring them to the lounge
Yes,
here
Mr.
before the anti-lounge
Yes.
to talk to the different secretaries.
Yes, and at this juncture, Mr. President, may I move that we recognize the distinguished gentleman from Davao, Senator Bongo, to co-sponsor the measure. So move, Mr. President.
Our distinguished colleague from the island of Mindanao, the great city of Davao, Senator Christopher Bongo is recognized.
Barangay election. Mr. President, I would like to co-sponsor Senate Bill 1306 postponing the December 2022 Barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections. First, I once again congratulate the COMELEC for the successful and generally peaceful conduct of the May 2022 national elections, which was truly commendable as it was the first electoral exercise in the Philippines to be conducted during a pandemic. As officials of the basic political unit in the country, barangay leaders and SK officials are considered as frontliners in the delivery of basic services in the community. Sila ang araw-araw na humaharap sa ating mga kababayan at nagsisiguro ng kaayusan sa mga barangay. They are the primary planning and implementing unit of government policies and programs and projects in the community. Naintindihan ko po ang trabaho nila dahil sila po ang kaharap ko araw-araw noon. Mga suki po yan at kasamahan natin sa serbisyo. To give local officials of the barangays and Sangguniang Kabataan ample time and continuity to pursue and implement the programs they have set in their respective jurisdictions, I am endorsing this proposed measure. Bigyan natin sila ng mas mahabang panahon para ipatupad ang kanilang mga proyekto na maaaring naantala dahil sa pandemya nung nakaraang 2 taon. Mr. President, gusto ko lang palalahanan ng COMELEC na kapag ipagpaliban natin ang eleksyon, dapat nilang siguraduhin na mas maraming botante ang makakaboto sa susunod na barangay at SK elections. Hindi dapat makompromiso ang karapatan ng ating mga kababayan na makaboto. Iengganyo natin silang magparehistro at bumoto ng kanilang barangay leaders sa susunod na eleksyon. Habang ginagawa natin ang lahat upang malampasan ang krisis na ito, hindi dapat mapabayaan ang ibang serbisyo na dapat ibinibigay ng gobyerno. Kasama na dyan ang karapatan ng taong bayan na bumoto. Lagi nating unahin kung anong makakabuti sa mga Pilipino, sa mga barangay at SK officials, ma-postpone man o hindi, patuloy ninyong gampanan ang inyong tungkulin at huwag pabayaan ang mga mahihirap, needy, helpless at hopeless nating kababayan. It is for this reason that I would like to request to be made co-author of this measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, distinguished colleague, Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President. Next on the list is the distinguished gentleman from the city of San Juan, Senator Jinggoy Estrada. I move that he be recognized, Mr. President.
Our distinguished colleague from San Juan, Senator Jinggoy Estrada is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I'm honored to co-sponsor Senate Bill 1306 under Committee Report Number 4 of the Committees on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation, joint with Committees on Local Government and Finance. Let me convey my deepest gratitude and appreciation to our esteemed Chair of the Committee on Electoral Reforms, the Lady Senator from Ilocos Norte, Senator Imee Marcos, for her urgent action on the bill filed by this representation. This measure, postponing the Barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections to December of next year, is one of my priority bills. It takes a place at a pivotal time for our country. The COVID-19 pandemic, which has adversely affected numerous aspects of our daily life, continues to spread among the population more than 2 years ever since its arrival in our country. Despite all the advancements we have made since then in trying to mitigate the risk posed by the disease, such as the rollout of vaccines and booster shots, there still exists the need to focus our efforts, resources, and time so that we can truly eradicate this disease and build our economy and our country back to its fullest potential. Mr. President, our barangays for the past 2 years of the pandemic have cooperated with the national government's efforts to stop the virus, them being at the front line in giving social aids to help mitigate its risks. However, the negative consequences of the pandemic also affected the barangay system and its ability to effectuate the programs and policies for which they were put in position to accomplish. The respectable leaders of the numerous barangays and Sangguniang Kabataan all over the country were not given the opportunity to truly serve their constituents. With the barangay being the most basic form of government in our country, it serves as the pillar from which government is able to accomplish its duties and obligations, managing the citizens at the level that the national government simply could not match. It is vital that they be at least given the opportunity to fulfill their electoral mandates, making up for opportunities taken away by the pandemic. It would be most prudent to do so, since by ensuring the execution and implementation of the programs they were elected for, it warrants a better cohesion of government at both the barangay and national level, which is essentially a key to the betterment of our country. Furthermore, as the most recent national elections have demonstrated, elections in our country have sowed divisiveness and violence among different individuals and groups in our society. Families, friends, and even strangers have attacked each other due to differing political views during the past election, and with majority of the government, including no less than His Excellency Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos, advocating for national unity and peace and security, holding an activity that would fuel the still apparent divide in our political system would be most inappropriate. Sa Kongreso po, inaatang ng batas ang responsibilidad ng pagdetermina ng halalan at termino ng ating mga barangay. At para sa ikapagkakaisa ng ating politikal na pagkakahati-hati dulot ng nagdaang pambansang halalan. Gayon na rin po ay para sa layunin na mabigyan pa ng sapat na pagkakataon ng ating mga barangay na tapusin ang kanilang mga proyekto at programang naantala dahil sa maraming lockdowns at 2 taon ng pandemya, at ay ating ginagamit muli ang kapangyarihan binigay sa atin ng batas. Even though differences in ideals and policies is fundamental, vital, and indeed the very essence of democratic governance, this representation believes that we need to tackle first the problems which are truly negatively affecting every single Filipino on a day-to-day basis, such as the lingering effects of pandemic, surging inflation, and rising cost of living. This bill is set out to fulfill this very objective. Mr. President, I look forward that this measure will be enacted into law at the soonest possible time. Maraming salamat po.
Mr. President.
Thank you very much, sir, distinguished colleague, Senator Jinggoy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Next, and last but not the least, is the distinguished gentleman from Cavite, the Honorable Senator Francis Tolentino, to co-sponsor the measure. I move that he be recognized, Mr.
Our
President.
distinguished colleague from the great province of Cavite, Senator Francis Tolentino.
Thank you, Mr. President. I join my colleagues as well as the chairperson of the Committee on Electoral Reforms in pushing for the postponement of the Barangay Sangguniang Kabataan elections, not just as a former local government chief executive, but as the vice chairperson myself of the said committee. Mr. President, previous speakers have spoken. The lower house have spoken resoundingly clear that it should be postponed. Election fatigue should not be overstressed. Mr. President, just this morning and late this afternoon, we witnessed the confirmation of the new DILG Secretary Benhar Abalos Jr. Mr. President, Secretary Abalos, since this morning, during my private talks with him and during his committee confirmation hearing, stressed the need to amend the decades-old local government code. And Mr. President, amending the local government code would not just adding additional functions, Mr. President, modifying functions, Mr. President, of the officials enumerated therein. Amending the local government code would entail restructuring even the basic functions of the barangay officials as well as the Sangguniang Kabataan officials in relation, Mr. President, to their newfound functions relative to the implementation of the Mandanas ruling, Mr. President. That's why, Mr. President, I am in favor of a one-year postponement of the Barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections because it will pave the way for the revision, the long-awaited revision of the local government code. And Mr. President, the time of 1 year would probably be sufficient enough for our barangay officials to lead in the grassroots level the post-pandemic economic recovery envisioned by our President and the national government. For those reasons, Mr. President, I associate myself with the previous statements of my colleagues, and I ask that I be made as co-sponsor of the same. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, distinguished colleague.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. President, the distinguished gentleman from the great province of Aurora is seeking the floor. I move that we recognize Senator Sani Angara.
The great province of Aurora with Benham Rice on its east coast.
Thank you, Mr.
You're
President. It's very
recognized.
short, actually. I just wanted to, because my interest was piqued by the remarks of Senator Tolentino. The local government code actually states that there should be a mandatory review every 5 years. So we don't shirk from that legal duty that we should review it every 5 years. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
I would like to associate myself with that statement, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 1306 under Committee Report number 4.
Is there any objection to the motion of the majority floor leader? The chair hears none. The motion is approved.